Okay, so we're going to do the body. This is what we would have covered in the first class, but we're going to put this in a video, long form video for this one, so we can all get used to doing bodies and stuff. Because, like I said in the previous videos I've already put up, the basics, forms, and the basic muscles and stuff. There's not that much going on with the human torso, from shoulders, neck down to pelvis and hips. There isn't a whole lot going on. But they're very, very important shapes that we can't necessarily just neglect and forget and kind of rough them in, put them in without any solid idea. But we've already had those videos there, so now what we're going to do is just make a torso from scratch. And for me, it all starts with the rib cage, which we're going to start off with a sphere. Because obviously, as we've gone over in the other videos, that rib cage is almost like a big teardrop that's had a bit of a bit cut out of the bottom of it. So what I'm going to do is quite simply is looking at my reference. I'm just going to start using the move brush, or you can even use the knife brush. You could use that to start taking chunks out of it. Because all we've got to get to at first is a kind of rib cage shape that faces in the right orientation, that has the right shape to it. So in fact, I will just go in there with a knife tool. So let's get it's thinner at the top, wider at the bottom. Well, wider-ish at the bottom. It's actually widest in the middle, so it's going to be wider around here. So hit that with a bit of like that. So from the front, I'm just kind of getting this shape in there for now. From the side, let's take off the chest area, and let's take off the back area like that. And then the bottom of the rib cage, let's just like that. For now, that's perfectly fine. That's all we basically need. And like I said, you can get to this point however you want. I use a knife tool then, but you can also just come in there with the move brush, trim dynamic, use a clay buildup, whatever you want to do. Just trying to get that shape in there. Now, one thing that's very important, because I am using a knife tool there, it's going to give me a lot of very flat surfaces, is I don't want it to be very flat going round. Remember, in the other videos, you're looking at the shape of the rib cage. It's actually very, very round. So here I'm coming there with my trim dynamic and just start flattening off. So I've looked from the top, get in there, flattening that a bit off, rounding it off a little bit. About like that. Round the back, obviously, I've just got a flat back, and that's not what we want. So let me start rounding that off a little bit. And then, like that. There we go. And then I'm just going to bring in top and the bottom a little bit, just to round it off. And that's all I'm going to be doing for the first bit, is just getting that general rib cage in there. Making sure, again, that we're thinking about the orientation. So the body is the chest is facing in this direction. Or if we draw a line, facing in this direction. Cool. Let me just doing here. Now remember as well, the length of the rib cage is around 1.5 heads. Again, this can differ from person to person. Some people have quite short torsos, some people have quite long ones. I myself, I'm long body, short legs, so my torso is slightly longer than 1.5 heads. There you go. Let's flatten off that bit there. Yeah, that's looking good. Just like that. So right there I've got a rib cage. Now, just like with the head, just like with anything we've sculpted so far, quite often things won't look perfect or finished or particularly noticeable or recognizable until we start adding other forms. So currently we've got the rib cage here, but this could be a nose, it could be anything. What I'm going to do is generate a shape for the pelvis. Now how can I do that? Well, I could come down here and into subtool, and I can insert another sphere and make my pelvis from there. I could pull out using the move brush. I could pull out the bottom of this to pull down into the pelvis, so I could absolutely do that. I could, get the clay build up and start building out like that. Now this is not necessarily super good to do because it's a bit messy. It takes ages, but you could, build it out like that. Another way we can do it, a way that I like doing it, is getting our movement gimbal up like this. I remember if you hold if you hold control and you drag off, you're going to basically make a copy of something. what I'm going to do is hold control and rotate. Sorry, hold control, move down, and then rotate round this new shape. And I'm just going to scale that in because I'm going to make this as I'm going to use this as my rib cage, my pelvis. So I'll do that again. So I've got my torso there, I've got my rib cage. I'm going to hold control and just copy off a new version like that, and then I'm going to rotate that around, and then just use a scale and move just to, you know, get it to the right size. Now remember the orientation again, so the pelvis faces downwards, like that. So we have that wide surface on the outside there, and the pinch on the inside. So we have those outward shape there, and a pinch at the back there. So what I've got to do now is just make sure that obviously my reference is matching my model, or my model is matching my reference as much as I can. So I've got Yanni on the other screen. Obviously you've got picture in picture here. So there's Yanni, there he is. And I've not really got any super good side-by-sides here, kind of intentionally. But what I can do is look at images like this, and I can look at his torso and just trying to find those landmarks. Because remember we're talking about, you can see his rib cage in front of his external obliques here, and then you got your iliac crest here. Okay, so with that I can get a good idea about how big the void is, the gap between the bottom of his rib cage here and the top of his iliac crest, the top of his hips there. Now, I've always used a measuring device as a fist. So if I make a fist and I put that in basically where my hips are, so around here, if you look in the picture around here, my fist, fingers facing forward, should be the height of my, or should be the gap there. So I can kind of use that as a bit of a shorthand. Let me just trim this off. There we go. Okay, that's much better. So what I can do is just try and get that idea in there. Now again, I'm going to just trim some stuff off just to try and get some of that shape in there that I want. I'm not aiming for a pelvis shape like so much. It's just I'm just trying to get some of those more anatomically correct shapes in there. Now this is going a little bit asymmetrical because I'm not sure why it's gone asymmetrical. This does look a little bit asymmetrical with all the slicing I've been doing, but don't worry about that unless it's so asymmetrical where it's like oops, like you've got bits sticking off like that. That's proper asymmetrical. If it's just a little bit wonky like that, then like from what I've got here, that's fine. Don't worry about it, because then we can always just do the mirror and weld to get it looking right. So with that there now, I'm just gonna get it looking good. And again, what I'm doing here is I'm going about the separate shapes kind of method, where everything is a separate shape. There you go. Obviously, you can make this from one big shape if you want to. Yep. There you go. So I got my hips in there. So if I'm doing this, everything in a separate shape, I've got my rib cage in there, and I've got my pelvis in there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my abdominals. I'm going to make my abdomen. So I'm going to bring in a separate shape. I'm going to bring in a sphere. I'm going to bring this to where my abdominals are. Now this I like doing because it's often a point where I can see if my pelvis is too wide, too small, if my rib cage is too long, whatever. Because again, I'm looking at my reference, and I'm almost like superimposing a shape over the abdominals here. And if I get my little brush out again, let's zoom in a little bit. Let me just zoom in, sorry. I'm not used to this little plugin I've got. There we go. There you go. So, I've got my rib cage here. Then I got my abdominal section here. And then obviously my pelvis system here. So, with that, I'm going to just bring that down, get my abdomen shape from the side there, so you can see we've got those top of the rib, well, bottom of the rib cage, external oblique section there, above the pectoral, coming down. That's where your stomach is, into your groin. At the back, obviously, we need to just pinch that in a little bit. And just build up a little bit. So, all I'm doing here is what we've been doing for all the head stuff. It's just looking at my reference, looking at my subject, and just trying to match the shapes that I'm seeing. And if we don't have the best of references, we just got to fall back on our knowledge. So what's actually happening with this area? There you go. So when I've done that, what I can do is just merge these together and then do a Dynamesh together, like that. Boom. Now you can see there that my rib cage is probably a little bit too long and it's a bit too wide at the bit. So I'm going to just bring this down. Bring this down a little bit. There you go. And then push this in a little bit. Raise this up. There we go. So you can see very, very quickly we're able to get a body in there. And this is just 32 as well. This is just a 32 resolution Dynamesh. So we're really able to get a good amount of information in there really, really nice and fast. And if I was to do this using a standard sphere, so let me bring this normal sphere, the whole process is identical. I've just got to do it from one big mesh instead. So let me just push it in from the side. Okay, from the side now, getting the thinner part at the top of my rib cage down, pull it down. Like that. And then there you go. So just using the dam standard there just to slice in some sharper lines. Yeah. Bring the back. Bring up the pelvis. Flatten this off a little bit. Oh, my chest is definitely a bit too sharp on top there, so we need to always be looking round. Again, we don't want things to be overly round or overly flat. Definitely need some adjustments to my back there. There we go. Pull that back a little bit. There we go. So you can see we're getting there. Now his chest is a little bit too proud there, so let's bend it around a little bit, and his bum's a little bit too small, so let's just pull it back a little bit. Oh, too wide from the front. Pushing the top. Much, much better. So again, exactly the same way we're thinking about the shape of the rib cage, the shape of the pelvis, and then the abdominal shape. You know, you've got the, again, the external curve and then the internal pinch. Okay. And then obviously from the front, we've got to be thinking about where the rib cage is, where the pelvis is, and obviously if you've got a spine in the middle there. And then you've got that area in between here. Obviously this is where your abdominal is here. And then you've got your external obliques wrapping round from the outside there. So but again, you just got to make sure that we're not overly round at the top. And again, this is why looking at reference, both skeletal, muscular, and obviously of our reference is really important. Now, one of the things with bodies, before I move on to another way of making a torso, something with bodies we need to be aware of is, you know, you're rarely going to find perfect reference of every angle. You know, there's very rarely do you find an upward shot, like a shot from below looking up to show the roundness of someone's chest. a shot from below or above from the back to show the roundness of someone's back. You know, you're rarely going to find those pictures. You'll sometimes get like intersections, like slices of the human body in some books. And if you know the Body Works, Gunther von Hagen, he's done some stuff like that where he's bisected the body across, so you're actually seeing the shape of the rib cage is like almost like a slice. So you're rarely going to actually find that. So what we've got to do is really make sure we're studying the shape of the body. You know, we're not making cartoons, we're making people, so we've got to make sure we understand the shape of rib cages, the shape of pelvises. You know, they are round, but they're not circular, they're curved. There you go. So boom, that is another body. So if we look at both of these next to each other, so exactly the same process in what I'm thinking. Exactly the way of thinking. Two different processes. So the one on the left obviously is where we're building it from 3 different shapes. So we start off with the rib cage, and then we basically did that quick duplication thing down to make the pelvis, did a little bit of chopping and moving, and then we brought in a separate shape for the abdominals. In this case, we brought in a sphere to make the abdominal region, and then we had that. Now that gives us a natural kind of upper abdominal kind of curve there, and the lower abdominal curve there, and then we made it all from one piece of geometry here, and now here using this one we have to be a bit more self-aware of the curves. You know, we have to input those curves ourselves and stuff, so we have to be more aware of this one if we make it all from one shape. Now there is another way of making objects, and we actually can make an entire body from this. But it's not as easy as that sounds. It's not quite as easy as that. It's not just you press a button and a body is made. It's just another way of making stuff. Now what this is something called Z-spheres. I'm actually going to delete these other... No, I'll leave them there for now. It's a Z-sphere. So you might have heard the term Z-spheres, or you might have seen it. If you click insert, you might have seen this little red ball here. It's called a Z-sphere. Now what a Z-sphere is, it's just another way of making geometry. It's neither a sphere, a capsule, a cylinder, or anything like that. It's a way of just generating unique geometry. You'll see a lot of people use this to base out some forms, and I use this a lot to base out some forms very, very quickly. Now this isn't, I will say, this might seem like, oh, if I just do this, it's perfect. It's not. This is just another way. Some people don't like using these spheres, but I'm going to show you how you can use them to generate a torso, and it's really, really simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a Z-sphere. There we go. So then we've got that Z-sphere right there. I'm going to make sure I got symmetry turned on. Now Z-spheres react and work a little bit differently to the world around them. If I go to move, scale, and rotate, I don't have that gimbal appearing. That's because they're actually moved by me dragging them around, or they're scaled by me dragging them around, or they're rotated by me dragging them around and stuff. So that'll take a little bit of getting used to. And to make new geometry as well, to make more geometry, you have to be in the draw mode, and then you can pull off new geometry. So you see these little balls get created that are then connected using these little kind of ringlets and stuff. That's just basically showing you some geometry. So what I can do is, if I look underneath, I'll move underneath, and I'll move my mouse until it snaps to one green circle in the middle. I'm going to start to just drag off a new sphere, and then I'm going to hold shift. What shift does, it basically makes the new sphere the same size as the sphere I've just brought out from, like that, which is good. And then I'm just going to move this down. Now one pro tip with Z-spheres is you want to make sure you're using a very, very small brush, just so things don't get confused, because sometimes it thinks you're clicking on something else when you're not. And what I can do now is if I move to, so I go to move, so I press W, I'm going to move this down. And what I've done here is I basically started to dictate the height of my torso. So this top bit here is my neck, the bottom bit here is the bottom of my pelvis. Cool. And if I press A for alpha, what I get is a preview of the mesh. Now it's going to look really wonky at first because it's a very basic, you know, we've not got that many Z-spheres in there, we've only got 2. And it struggles to make any proper geometry when you've only got 2 Z-spheres. But just by pressing A for alpha, you get a preview. It's not actually workable geometry yet. But if I'm trying to get that that shape in that I want, that I want to get that curved shape in like that, pelvis down here, ribcage up here, I've got to add in another Z-sphere. So what I can do is go back to draw mode, and then I'm just going to click where you got this like ringlet pipey section in the middle. I'm just going to click in the middle of there, and it adds a new Z-sphere inside there. And then I can just move the camera to the right. There you go. So now when I press A, I'm getting a better shape. So I can, make sure that if I'm... This top section here is essentially my rib cage. This bottom section is my pelvis, and this middle section is my abdominal. So I can start to get a shape in there, which is cool. And then I can use stuff like scale. So scale it in a little bit. I can change the shape a little bit. Scale this one up a little bit. Change the shape a little bit. So Z-spheres are really, really fun. And I think I might just do another video just on Z-spheres alone. And you can keep adding Z-spheres to refine the shape as much as you can to a point. There will be a point where adding new Z-spheres will only make things harder to work with. But right there, I'm able to get a nice, body shape of some variety. Still needs a lot of work. Now what's really cool about Z-spheres is I can also start to drag out other forms. And I can start to create a body essentially. And you'll see this being done by a lot of people when they're starting off base meshes, or even like a lot of creature artists do this if they're trying to get a particular pose, like a dragon or something with like a really kind of elongated body. They'll use Z-spheres to create that massive geometry first of all, to then sculpt into it and refine it. There you go. So you can get some stuff in there really fast. Now it's not a great surface to sculpt on at first, but that's the next step. So I'm just going to get rid of all these bits I don't want. There you go. Because I just want these for now. Cool. So I brought those 3 Z-spheres in, and I've got this little peanut shape. And I'm thinking, okay, I could work with this. I can generate geometry from this. But like I said, this isn't actually geometry. And again, this is where Z-spheres can get a little bit tricky, and where ZBrush in general can get a little bit tricky. On my right-hand side menu here, down at the bottom, we've got something called adaptive skin. It's like 5th from the bottom is adaptive skin. And you can see preview turned on. The hotkey for that is obviously just A. Now there's a couple of things I want to point out in here. You've got density and you got Dynamesh resolution. So once I generate this geometry, it's going to give me a piece of geometry to work from that follow these parameters. So for instance, it will be make a piece of geometry that already is set to a 256 Dynamesh resolution. If I drag this down to 0 and I re-preview, it's going to give me a... In fact, we can do this. There you go. So if I turn that back to 256. So this is the surface it's going to give me. If I just use the standard density to 256 Dynamesh, it's going to give me this surface. If I lower that density, it's going to give me this. So it still has 256 resolution, but the mesh is, appears to be lower resolution or lower density. If I set this Dynamesh to 0, then we get actual like polygonal data. This is almost like Maya level stuff. So you can see there's no Dynamesh, we're just getting basic geometry. So again, I can up that resolution. And I've upped the density there to something a little bit more, sculptable. I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this to 3, and I'm going to set this to 64. There we go. So that's what my geometry is going to look like when it's done. So the preview, it's all good. The rest of this you don't really need to worry about at this stage. This is like more advanced level stuff. So once I'm happy with this, and I've got the density that I like, and I've got the resolution that I'm like, I'm going to click Make Adaptive Skin. Now here's where ZBrush becomes tricky. This because I've just clicked it there, and you can see this thing here has been added. But in the scene at the minute, this is still that Z-sphere mesh, which I don't want. So what I'm actually going to do, now that I've done this, I'm actually going to delete this mesh, because I don't want it anymore. Like that. So I just got rid of it. If I come to Insert, up at the very top here, you got Quick Pick. That new piece of geometry I just made is there. The skin Z-sphere one. This is that geometry I've just made. So I'm going to click that. There we go. And I'm pressing A now, and you can see it's not switching between Z-sphere mode and sculpting mode. So now what I've got is a workable mesh that I can go in there and just start, doing my thing. I can get my rib cage in there. Get my pelvis in there. And again, we can approach this the exact same way we approached everything so far. It's just how we get to the base mesh at first. There we go. Again, let's just sketch in some of those landmarks. There you go. There you go. So again, what we've got here is that lovely bit of curve and crease that we want to have. Now from the front we do have a little bit of curve and crease we can think about. You do have a curve and you do have a crease here, but it all depends on the actual subject, because if we look at Yanni here, there is no real curve and crease. The only crease we have here is because he's slightly tilting his body to the side. So he's got more of a, because obviously his body's all kind of crooked and tilted. So once I've done this, it's then time to, build the rest of the body. What's next? Now I'm going to just go and use this first initial shape, just because it's there, like that. So now, so like I said, now it's time to actually make the shape. So what I've got my base shape in there, I'm going to spend a bit more time, just look around to see if I can find any really obvious issues. I'm still this is a 32 resolution, so it's tiny. Again, just like with the head, you can only really get so much information through from a really low res mesh. So let's try and just accent some of those bits of information first. And that's where I can start to, look at. So Yanni's body's pretty straight. There's not that much craziness going on. Cool, so now I'm going to up my resolution. Now this, I'm going to jump quite a ways. I'm going to go up to 250 straight away from here. So I can get in there and do quite a lot of damage to this. And now it's just about bringing in that information. Now I am missing a few bits that I'd like to get in there. I'm missing my shoulders. I'm missing a neck. And obviously I'm missing legs. But my shoulders and my neck are two important bits, so I can start to just bring that kind of stuff out. And I could have brought that stuff out in the last section, in the last resolution, but I'm going to bring my neck. Now just like with the arms, the neck doesn't come from the middle of the torso here, it comes from a little bit further back. The back of the body feels a little bit flatter than the front of the body. Something there, and then move that up. There you go. And again, this is going to give me some basic information at first. I'm not worried about things looking perfect at first. Okay, look at an idea what my arms are going to come from. Flip that, and then bring out now some else. So I want to make like little peg arms and a peg neck at first. Now, admittedly, what I'd be working from here is a model where I've probably already sculpted the head and the neck in there already. But if I'm just doing a torso, then I've got that to deal with. So let's come in, and then I can start thinking about my muscles. So building up that information, thinking about those zones. So I'm thinking about my, if I was just thinking about the top of the body here, what have I got? I've got my trapezius coming in. Obviously, I've already started to indicate some deltoids of this, like my little pegs coming out of my torso there. So I've got my trapezius. I've got my lats. And then my pectorals. And this takes a bit of time as well. There's no point, there's absolutely no point rushing through making the initial blocking for the body. Because just like with the head, you want to have a good initial base. Because then everything else is a lot quicker to fulfill and do. Okay, so I'm going to block in some bony landmarks as well. So I've got my sternum there. Obviously my rib cage is about there. Got my clavicle somewhere around here. Oop. Just building up. I was thinking I've got a bit of a gut on him here, so I don't want to get that. So I'm just going to flatten off this area a little bit. So I'm gradually and carefully building mass. Again, always looking around, always moving around, looking at my reference. So if we just move to a more relevant position. That one. So what I want to do is look at here, look at the transitional point from the top of the clavicle down to the pectoral, top of the clavicle up into the trapezius. How does the pectoral kind of blend into the abdominals? So it's all about just building up, carefully building up. And again, remember what I said, we don't want to scrub this information in, you know. This information is obviously not what we want. We want to build up those muscles like they would be. So remember where they attach. So the pectoral attaches to the top of the clavicle there, and then round to the sternum. And then underneath, and it's quite round as it goes into the armpit there. Yep. There you go. And then we're talking about those obliques. Let's have a quick step back to see what it looks like. Okay, looking good. So let's get some of those obliques in there. One thing I want to avoid is making things a little bit too big or too small. So, you know, stepping back into making sure that everything's proportional to each other. This is looking good. I could probably add a little bit more mass to my pecs, but at first I don't want to spend all my time on one bit. At first I want to make sure I'm going around and getting all the landmarks in there. Again, just like with the head, we don't want to spend ages making the nose to find out that everything else has been ill-considered and looks terrible. So I'm working my way down, got my abdominals. Now I'm looking here, and obviously Yoni does have those beautiful little indentations that I'm just going to try and kind of sketch out a landmark for myself. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, we're talking about this right there. There you go. Sorry. There you go. And then we've got the armpits we can just start to bring in a little bit. Not that much, but just a little bit. Indicate them a little bit. And then, again, I forget what these muscles are called, but those muscles that are coming in from underneath the lat muscles, because the lat muscles, remember, go into the armpit. Like that. They come out and they intersect with the external obliques there. So we go down. So what I'm going to do here as well is use the dam standard to slice in some information. You know, I'm just going to define some stuff a little bit. Not that much. So let's get my abdominals in there. Again, looking at my reference. Where's my belly button? It's about there. Now remember how in the abdominals you have 8 muscles, really, but we only really care about the top 6. So you got one there, and one there. And then you have got one that goes, well, 2 to go down like that. But really, the shapes come from these 6. So I'm just going to slice in some of this information so that I'm aware of it. Again, I can always push stuff back later on if they're a little bit too defined. Oh, there you go. There we go. There you go. And then that iliac crest. So I might go silent for a bit, sorry, this is I'm just sculpting in some information. And then just at the bottom there, you've got that iliac crest. Right there. Which is your... Oh, there you go. Just got to make sure that I'm sculpting this so you can see it. You know that you've got that pelvis there. There you go. So you got that pelvis there, so that's obviously going to give you all that information at the bottom of the hips. And then you do have that bony landmark right across there, the iliac crest. Cool. Ooh. Step back a little bit. Now with the body as well, don't be afraid to really destroy some of the information, you know, knock it back to pull it forward again, you know, if it's really not working. I'm going to do is move back up and sort out the neck a little bit. Again, you're probably going to be sculpting this, and hopefully you will be sculpting this with a head attached. And it's something I do suggest is use one of your best heads, for instance, and build out from that. This is literally just focusing on the body. So get my sternocleidomastoid muscles in there. Again, remember this muscle is attached to other parts of the body. It's not a curvy thing. I don't want to see curvy sternocleidomastoid. You know, this is a straight line. There you go. And this trapezius. There you go. Now the only other thing to think about with the trapezius, now that we're up here, so we do a Dynamesh, is that there is obviously your trapezius, it does dip in a little bit inside the shoulder. So if we define that clavicle a bit more, where is our clavicle? There is our clavicle, our collarbone. And that should be more back there. Yeah, there we go. That's better. So remember as well, your clavicle bends backwards like this. It doesn't fit. It doesn't sit straight like this. It bends backwards. So get our trapezius there. You do kind of have a bit of a cavity on the inside. So when with that defined clavicle there, right here you have got a little bit of an indentation. Not too much. Again, this is a lot. It's a lot of subtle work. This whole stuff. It's a lot of subtle work. That, and then there's a muscle that comes underneath from the sternocleidomastoid muscle here that comes across right there. In fact, if I draw it, can I get a bigger brush? How can I make this bigger? Okay, sorry, I've got a new like pen thing and I can't work out how to use it. Oh, there it is. Boom. Boom, there you go. That's better. I figured it out. There we go. So yeah, so you got your sternocleidomastoid muscle that comes down. Obviously you got your clavicle, which starts from the inside of the collarbone there, because your sternum is right there. That comes across, attaches to here, and this is where your scapula, your shoulder blade, kind of comes in from the back as well. You got your trapezius, which is obviously coming in like that, attaches to your deltoid here. On the inside of the neck there, you have got a muscle, which again on very, very muscly people you can kind of see come down and make a subtle shape there when they're tensing. That's a nice shape to put in there, and it's even nice to put in there and knock right back as pardon me, as well. So remember, sternocleido attaches to your clavicle, and it will attach to the back, just behind the ear as well in your skull. Your trapezius attaches to on your occipital lobe at the back, and in the top it attaches to your deltoid, the top of your shoulder, top of your deltoid there. And you get this muscle which kind of comes in and it gets lost inside this area because this area kind of shapes like that. So let's knock the back a little bit. There you go. There you go. So I'm going to smooth off a little bit now, push back some of that really sharp information. Now again, what I'm doing here is I'm being a bit more kind of sculpty and strategic with my smoothing. There you go. Because sometimes you want to get that slightly fibrous look in there, because that shows some muscle tension in the shoulders. There we go. Smooth off a little bit there. Push a little back in the abdominals. Knock that back. Again, I'm trying to maintain some of that more sharper information. And I'm looking at the shadows as well. I'm always looking at how the shadows are being formed by all this that I'm doing. So you can see there I'm getting that kind of, I need to push that right back in the in the stomach there. But you can see I'm getting a little bit of that shadow information in the top of the abdominals here. That's what I want. I don't want super sharp. I don't want boxy abdominals, muscles or anything like that. I want to push them back. Again, you'd be surprised at how much a slight shadow can help sell this information. So what I'm doing here is I'm just smoothing out some of those landmarks to then do a little bit more defining. There we go. Then I can come in here with a very low sensitivity. It's like in this case the damn standard, and carefully just start to round some stuff out. You can see they're just rounding off the pectorals at the top. Bring this down. Oh, there you go. So use the damn standard just to kind of shape out some of those muscles that we want. Obviously, we want the abdominals. Sorry, the lats. We want the pectoral. Not the pectoral. I'm losing all my muscles here. The trapezius. There we go. And again, we want to remember that infraspinatus just here. I want to remember that little section there, so carry that up to the top of the shoulders. There we go, and that's obviously going to bend around. Remember that nice crease from the other video we were looking at Yanni's shoulders. He's activating that shoulder. There's that nice crease where the three muscles from the deltoid meet the shoulder, and that'll come up like that. Then once I've done that, I can come in there and start to, again, maybe with the trim the clay build-up. Oh, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a clay build-up. I'm going to move that focal length up so it's a lot smoother. Maybe that's smooth. Maybe about there. That's better. So I've moved my focal shift up on my clay build-up brush, so I've not got as much of the toothy brush like this. It's a little bit softer. So I'm building up in subtle layers, which helps me maintain, one, some nicer softer surface, but two, it can lend towards that fibrous muscle definition that I like. There you go. So subtly building it up. And again, this just comes with a lot of time and practice and study. Muscles are a funny old thing. At first they kind of get a little bit weird to do, but you know, just with a little time and practice, you understand where the main kind of muscle shapes are, what they are actually shaped like. And to control them. So what I've done there is I've done a bad thing where I've ballooned them out a little bit. C7 a little more prominent. So, sorry, went a bit quiet then. So what a lot of what we need to do with the body, because there's less fine detail in there, is we've got to get the main mass in there first of all, make sure that the shapes are correct, make sure that the proportions are correct, make sure the muscle positions are correct, and then we can start to kind of modify it. Because what I've done there is I've made the main torso, I've scratched in sketched in the muscle groups. I've done a first pass of smoothing, so that first where I got rid of all the first initial clay buildup information, and then pushed it back a little bit, and then I'm going back into it to define some other areas. And I've said this a good few times that there are points where you can put some information in and then knock it back, knock it far back, so that really what you're doing is you're using it to create a little bit of shadow. And this is where the getting confident with the smoothing brush is important, because again, smoothing can damage a mesh. Smoothing can do a lot of damage to our work, because if we just over smooth everything, we lose definition on stuff. Make some adjustments there. I think his torso is a little bit too long, too high there, so let me just bring some of that down. There we go. So again, what I'm looking for is lumpiness. I don't want any lumpiness, and you don't just do one thing and it's all gone. It's just something that will come as you work through a sculpt. It'll eventually become unlumpy. And what I'm looking at here is I've got a fair bit of lumpiness in the corner here where I've got those muscles. So I'm gonna push those back a little bit at first. That's better. And then do that whole thing where I can just there we go. What I'm also doing as well is when I'm adding in some of these details, like here I'm thinking about those interlocking muscles in the external obliques, just as they come underneath the lats. What I'm looking at is, yes, the shadows that he's made, the actual muscles there, and I might just put in some landmarks. So I might just do like a couple of V's there, and those are the points where my muscles intersect. But then I'm not just going to smooth it back and leave it, because all I'm doing there is adding in a landmark, adding in a sketch. From there I'm thinking, right, I've got muscles that are going to be on this side. I've got muscles that are going to be on this side. So I'm going to use my fancy new drawing tool. So I've got, the muscles that are coming in from my lat there. I've got these muscles that are coming in. And then from my external obliques, I got these muscles. So I've got these muscles kind of intersecting. So if I put in this landmark in the middle, I've then got to think about what's happening around it. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Because if I do that, oops, it is. Because if I've done that, there you go. I can then just go in there and slightly raise them up. Like that. Again, checking how much I'm actually pulling those out. Like that, and then I can push them back. There you go. There you go. So you can see, not a whole lot of work needs to be done, but it's a lot of thinking and remembering and measuring. The M word, the big M word, a lot of measuring. And again, look at your reference, because what I was just about to do then was over-define the clavicle. But if we look at Yanni, he's not got a very defined clavicle on the lower part here, underneath his collarbone. It's defined at the top there. You can see some beautiful indentations where the deltoids are kind of what I'm looking for. What's the word I'm looking for? Attaching to the clavicle in the corner. I hope you can see my. If I do this, it might be a bit easier. Wow, there we go. There we go. So right here, you can see where the deltoid, that anterior deltoid there, is attaching to the clavicle. These little indentations. So that's not the actual, that's not ridges in the bone. That's muscle wrapping over the top of the bone. And you can see some shadow and highlights here. So the top of his clavicle, yes, is very defined. You can see that sternocleidomastoid muscle attaching to the inside of his collarbone. But underneath here, where we'll go down into the pectoral, it's not very defined. It's pretty much a straight slope down towards the abdominal. Now, one thing I am going to look at here, and I love putting in, is just this little sharp line here. It's where the pectorals here go underneath the deltoid. It creates this beautiful little sharp line. So I'm just going to kind of sketch in something for that. I don't want to go too over the top with it. Now, talking about flatness as well there, if I look from the side, you can see my chest is a little... You can't see because the thing's in the way. There we go. If I look from the side, you can see that my pectorals there are a little bit lumpy, a little bit wobbly. Right there. So I want to sort that out. How am I going to sort that out? Trim dynamic, clay build-up. If I set my focal shift to a higher number so it's a bit smoother, I can just build it up slowly. I'm using the damn standard. I don't want to use the damn standard. There we go. There goes. Build it up. Just a bit subtler. This is where balloon pecs can sometimes come in, because as you're adding mass to try and even them out, you're adding mass. So sometimes it's all about taking away mass and then adding mass. Again, if you watch acrylic, like good acrylic painters work, they'll go over to get, because acrylic often dries very lumpy naturally. So to get a very, very smooth oil-like surface, you've got to kind of go over the surface in multiple different directions. There you go. There we go. And again, I'm just looking at some of these angles. My pectorals, they're all kind of wonky, so let's just... Yeah. Yeah, there we go. So all I'm doing here is I'm finishing off just by defining some bits. There we go. So not quite an absolutely perfect Yoni, but I'm using him as a landmark. I'm using him as to follow my different features. Okay. So I'm going to call the sculpt for now done there, because for me now it'd just be about nudging stuff around. It's going to be, it might take me another couple of hours just to nudge around, to finesse, to polish off, to add a little bit of detail, to step away for a little bit and then come back. And then I'd probably end up needing to add things like arms. I'd need a head, that kind of stuff. But just as a body on its own, I'm happy with this. I've just seen one thing. I'm just gonna slightly do that. There you go. So yeah, it's all about getting to this point. Just like with the head, there's only a certain amount of detail we can get in there. But what are the things we need to really think about? Number one, measure. We need to make sure that we're measuring all the time. Now you need to make sure that you're understanding the measurements. We've gone over that in the body in one of the other videos. It's not quite the same as when we come to heads. Obviously heads are, if we use that little skull at the top here, heads are, half and then thirds and then whatever, and with the body though, it's about knowing how big is the rib cage, how big is the pelvis, how many heads wide, how many heads high, the tilt, all this kind of stuff. So number one, we've got to measure, gotta measure, and measure as you're doing as well. And I'm not just talking about looking at a picture, drawing lines over it. I'm talking about looking at our sculpt and actually looking to see if things are measuring up with each other. Find a good shorthand that helps you, visually measure stuff out. For me, it's that fist. If you make a fist, it should be the size of the distance between the bottom of your rib cage and the top of your pelvis. Heads, in the chest, this should be 1.5 heads, wide, 1.5 heads wide, tall, that kind of jazz. We've gone over it in the other video, obviously. It's about knowing the underlying structure. I've not really got a drawer in hand today, so I'm just, there you go. Make sure we're understanding that and the underlying structures. The top here and the pelvis here are all facing in different directions. So we have that pinch on the inside, curve on the outside. Very, very important. And a big one as well, and something I see a lot of people in the beginning completely neglecting, and it makes me sad, is the shape of the spine. This, if you get that pinch in the back, if you get that pinch and that curve, that's you following the spine, because that's all about the spine. If you're coming from, if we use our skull here, if you come down into the rib cage, you come over there, and then you come down into the hips, and then you get the curve of the spine. So number one, I'm going to get rid of all this. Number one, you've got to measure. Always look at your measurements. Number two, you got your forms. So forms are your muscles, the bone landmarks. Remember, the bone landmarks are your clavicle, your sternum. In this case, the rib cage does show itself there. You've got the iliac crest. From the back, you've obviously got the scapula, the shoulder blade. Makes itself known on the back of the body. Obviously, again, you got your iliac crest at the back as well. So all the bony landmarks, that comes under your forms. So if we go boop, boop, so bony. Landmarks. Obviously, muscle forms. And then you've also got, obviously, fat deposits. Oh, deja vu. So you've got fat deposits. Now we've not talked about fat deposits too much now on this one, because we've used a subject which has got a very muscular body, low fat index. There's not a lot of fat there, but we will be looking at more larger people and really looking and breaking down where these deposits are, because not everyone in the world is a perfect human. Everyone has fat everywhere. So we've got measurements, we've got forms. Forms include bony landmarks, muscle forms, fat deposits, and then you've got features. Features, or you might also call it details, I guess, which are all about, in this case, again, we've got like those beautiful little lines in the shoulders. You got the shape of the pectorals from the front, but also what's going on like in the armpit area there. You've got the definition, so you're trying to find all those nice bits of shadow that create these forms. What's the actual shape of the belly button you're doing? Not everyone has a vertical belly button, not everyone has a horizontal belly button, so work out what's going on. Are you particularly well defined in the iliac crest area? Are you particularly well defined in the neck area? So these are the features and the details. And also, number 4, brush control. We should be getting better at this now because we've been doing so much sculpting, but brush control is incredibly important. One, for making mass. Obviously, you want to make sure you're rotating around, that you're not making muscles too balloony or things aren't sticking out and kind of unnaturally wobbly. But also, if you're going in there and you're doing some smoothing to smooth off some harsh details, that you're not just absolutely whitewashing the whole thing and making everything too soft, that you're smoothing particular areas and then maintaining sharper areas. You know, like before where I was using the damn standard to put in some of these lines here. The same for these little dudes up here. I'd put them in and then I'd knock them back, because it's all about shadows, not necessarily about creases and lines. In this case, all about shadows. So brush control. This is all the stuff we need to do for the body. Now, here I've done a quick body, but I would say hour and a half for a body at first. You know, take an hour and a half for a body. Use a pre-made head. So get one of your heads. One with a neck, it would be useful. And then make your body separate. So make it as a separate subtool. Don't connect it to your head. But, you know, spend an hour and a half just on the body and slowly work through, methodically work through. Go through all these steps. You know, number one, measure. Is everything measuring up? Number two, am I getting in my muscle forms or bony landmarks? Number three, can I start to define certain features? Number four, that continues through the whole thing. Am I controlling my strokes? Am I moving round? Am I looking at all different angles? Up, down, left, right, back, front. You know, this is what you need to do. And bodies are really, really fun to do. Just like with the head, bodies have got a lot of features that are fun to sculpt. And admittedly, there's not as much pressure on the body. Like with the head, you've got so many things you need to think about. With the body, there's less. And admittedly, you know, when you are doing full-fledged characters, there's only a few occasions when you're going to be doing like muscly characters like this. A lot of the time, what's going to be happening is you're just going to get a basic form in there to then dress a character. You don't necessarily need to think about the wiry muscle detail or anything like that. It's only if your character, you know, like you can take all the clothes off your character, like, you know, you drop all the armor and then you're exposing the skin. That's when you need to be worrying about this. Or if you're doing like Baldur's Gate, for instance, goes into a lot of detail, a lot of anatomical detail, but you can drop all your clothes. If you like God of War, Kratos, he's all torso, isn't he? So those are examples of where you would need to worry about making sure this information is perfect. But then you've got games like most other games where you don't necessarily exposing the body. All we've then got to worry about is just making sure that our anatomy is good, that our proportions are good, that the distance is good. That, you know, if we are wearing tighter clothes in some areas, that any muscles that are being defined through the tighter clothes are correct. You know, arms and legs and hands obviously will need a lot more detailing on them, a lot more care taken on them, because they're a bit harder to sculpt. But also you see exposed arms more than exposed bodies. You know, short sleeves, 3/4 sleeves, that kind of jazz, and necks as well, same jazz. You know, you get to the collar of, or the collar of someone's t-shirt and stuff. So nice hour and 10 video there. Shorter than I expected to actually to go on for, but I want you to back this up with the 3 other videos on there as well. So we've got the basic muscle forms, you got the more in-depth muscle forms with the skeleton, then you got the skeleton draw over, and then you've got this. All 4 of these videos really, really try and take in the information, because they all really help. Cool. Oh, I'm doing the thing. There we go.